Right, so basically the event was kind of designed around the back-to-back Democratic Set Commission. And the idea was that we wanted to explore the question of home in a bit more detail. So as some of you know, and maybe have actually been involved in the filming in Central Milton Keynes in Queen's Court, Back-to-Back Theatre have been filming for the last 3 days, I think. And are currently editing all the footage that they filmed with their democratic set. And so basically a cross-section of MK citizens, residents, all different kinds of people, different ages, came onto the set and made the set their home in some ways for a few minutes and did all kinds of different and interesting things. And so in the context of that, we thought that it'd be kind of nice to maybe open up the discussion of home a little bit more. So when I was asked to do this and to facilitate this forum, I kind of thought of, I'm not sure if this is it all right? Or are you getting feedback? Okay, sorry. I was thinking of a couple of questions that I could sort of base this around. So I came up with a few questions that I thought were interesting, which were, you know, what does it mean to have a home or to create a home or to feel at home? What qualifies as a home? What makes different communities, different individuals, migrants, refugees, minorities, differently abled, the young, the old, etc. What makes people feel or be at home? And is having a home the same as feeling or being at home? And how do we dwell, really? How do we inhabit or create a home in a world that is unstable, that is in flux, that is constantly moving and shifting? So really, how do you create a home in an era of migration, of globalization, and so on? And this last question is kind of of particular interest to me, both because of the research that I do, but also because of my own personal story of migration. So I wanted to share a little bit of that with you very quickly. And by means of that, sort of try to explore how I feel at home or how I've created homes in different places. And I think a lot of my personal story is about this kind of disjuncture that I often feel between, you know, having a large number of homes in all kinds of different places, but actually feeling at home and not feeling at home in them at the same time. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you a little bit. So, Richard, Q Richard, yes. So I was born in Krakow, in Poland, in the apartment over here, I think, here. That's actually my grandmother's apartment. It's her flat. It was a 2-room flat with a small kitchen. And I lived there for the first 2 years of my life, which I obviously don't remember that well, with both my parents and my grandparents. So when I was born, Poland was still under a communist government, so it wasn't quite easy to get your own flat. So a lot of people lived with their families for quite substantial periods of time. But luckily, my father worked in the mining industry, which was very highly prized and highly valued in Poland at the time. And so he was kind of up on the list for having a flat assigned to him, basically, and to our family. So 2 years after I was born, we moved to our next flat, which was here, which you actually can't see. I've asked my mom for all these photos. I didn't give her much direction, but she's quite bored at the moment because she just had surgery. So she was going through all these old photo albums, trying to find all the places that we've lived in. So I have to thank my mom for that. So we moved into this building in Gliwice, which is in Silesia, which is actually where the coal mining takes place, or used to take place in Poland. And we lived there for a number of years. We were now 2 kids, so my brother was born right before we moved. And again, it was kind of a one bedroom, 2-room kind of apartment, which was quite a luxury at the time in Poland. So we were quite excited to have our own space because a lot of people were still living with their families. So my brother and I shared one room, and then my parents slept on a pull-out couch in the living room, which was quite normal in Poland at the time, that your parents wouldn't kind of have their own bedroom. And it wasn't really a pull-out couch. It was actually kind of 2 mattresses that they stuck together on top of each other and then covered with some sort of blanket in the day, and it was a couch, and then at night they just kind of pulled them apart and it was a bed. So there's another picture of the building, which my mom insisted on providing because she said buildings on their own are kind of boring, so we have to have some people in front of buildings. So this is the building with me going to my first communion, my brother in the front, and my grandmother, and possibly my godfather, but I can't quite make out who that is in the background. So we lived there for a few years, and then eventually we managed to buy our own flat. This was coming sort of to the end of the communist period, so it was kind of possible to get your own flat. And so then we moved into another building, which, as you can see, is the height of brutalist architecture in Poland. But this was the height of luxury at the time. So we lived on the third floor. As you can see, I'm very impressed by our new home. This is me on the left. I look like this for most of my teenage years. All the photos have my face like this on them. And I really regret it now because I can't find a good photo of myself when I was a teenager. But I was quite displeased with the world at that stage. So, but this was supposed to be our permanent home, and we had now 2 bedrooms, so it was very exciting. My brother and I had our separate rooms. My parents still did the sort of pull-out couch situation in the living room, but it was a bigger living room. And everything was great, except we only lived here for 3 months, and then my parents decided that they were going to immigrate to the US. And as many immigrants, they decided that they were going to immigrate basically for political reasons, but also mainly for economic reasons, thinking that my brother and I would have better opportunities if we lived and grew up in the US. What was interesting is that they didn't tell us that we were actually moving, because they were worried that if they told us that we were moving permanently, then we would tell our friends at school, and then our friends could tell someone else, and they could tell someone else, and someone could get this information. Because at that time, of course, you still weren't allowed to emigrate, because even though it was coming to the end of the communist government, it was still a communist regime. So we basically left Poland, as we did many summers, to visit my grandfather in Chicago, and then we just never came back. So as you can imagine, it was kind of traumatizing, because I thought I was going on holiday with my parents, as we did every year. And then when we got there, it's only then that my parents told us, well, actually, we're kind of staying here, and we're never going back. So I should have kind of clued in when I noticed like crystalware and winter jackets in the 2 luggages that we took with us, but I didn't. So I was quite traumatized and quite unhappy about that. And so when we first got there, we lived with my grandfather, who had kind of half immigrated and was half exiled. It's a bit complicated the way it worked for the last 15 years, for that past 15 years in Chicago. So we lived in his house for a while. It was, again, sort of a 1-bedroom conversion in what was then known as the Mexican ghetto. If you could, thank you. Not in this house, but again, my mom thought this was a much more exciting picture. This is the house next door. And obviously it's not chronological, because this is where we used to take a picture in front of this house every single time we went to Chicago, because it was a very exciting house. And my grandfather's house is the one like right next door that you can see a sliver of the boring gray. And so we lived there for a while. It wasn't the best place to live. Now it's, of course, a fantastic, gentrified, super expensive neighborhood of Chicago, which shocked me to no end when I went back there. But we moved to a slightly different part of town, and we lived in a basement flat for quite a while. And I don't remember much about the basement flat. I think that's the next picture. Other than that it was a basement, that it was very dark, that my room, you had to enter my room through the laundry room, so I wasn't very excited about that. And actually my bedroom was kind of the hallway of the entire apartment, so everyone had to kind of walk through the laundry room and then go through my bedroom to enter the apartment. So I wasn't very pleased. And I wasn't quite, excited to bring my friends over, anything of that sort, so that didn't happen. And of course, we couldn't send that kind of picture to our family back in Poland, so we took a picture in the front of the house, which is obviously not ours, which is where the landlords lived, and the basement was kind of through the back. And I remember it constantly flooding. And I remember one time we actually took a skateboard, and all of us kind of skated across to get into the flat because it was actually entirely flooded, and to get some stuff out, and then skated back, which we thought was very clever at the time. But yeah. So then we moved to another flat, which was kind of slightly nicer because it was actually on the ground floor. But it had, again, it was kind of a conversion. And so there were, 3 or 4 apartments in the house itself. And so we kind of lived on the ground floor, and we had a shared hallway, and we had a shared, shared doors with the other apartments. And though it was a nice place, I was always kind of obsessed, I remember as a child, with the fact that we didn't have our own house, and we didn't have our own door, and we didn't have our own number. And I became kind of really obsessed with having a house that had its own number. I don't know why, it sounds silly now, but when I was a kid, I was obsessed with it, and I always thought, I don't want to have like apartment 3 in some number. I want to be my own number. I remember thinking this as a kid, and it was so bizarre, but I had that fixation for quite a while. So we stayed here for a while, and then, just when we kind of started to settle in, my parents decided that they were going to move to Canada. And the reason we moved to Canada was because we actually were living in the States illegally, as many people do still and did at the time. We basically overstayed our visitor's visa, which we had at the time, for 2 years. And in Canada, we could actually get status, resident status, and then citizenship eventually. So my parents then decided, oh wait, there was another house. Sorry. There was another house in between. Oh, wait, which actually had its own door. That was the exciting part of that house. So that's my mom in front of that house. And I actually think there's another picture of that house with my brother in front of it. And so after this house, when everything seemed great and we were settled, my parents then decided to move to Canada. But what they decided actually is that they were going to move to Canada on their own, and they were going to send us back to Poland for a year. They were really appalled with the state of American education, and they wanted us to live in Poland for 1 more year while they settled in Canada. So they sent us back to Poland to live with my grandmother in the apartment that we had originally bought, which my mom had kept empty because she kept insisting that we were going back to Poland imminently and we were never going to stay in the US or Canada. So I lived there for a year with my brother, which was a very bizarre situation because I ended up going to the same class that I had left with the same classmates, but 2 years later, after having lived in Chicago for 2 years. So they all thought I was really strange, and I thought they were really strange. And it never really felt like home, and I was really excited to go back because up until this point, I was constantly crying to go back home and to go back to Poland. And when I got there, it was all strange, and it wasn't my home anymore, and it was a very sort of surreal experience. So we stayed there for a year with my grandmother in that nice brutalist apartment, which still looks exactly the same, by the way. And then we moved to Canada. And so then we stayed, I think, in a series of 3 apartments. The first one, again, sort of a 1-room apartment where we didn't really have furniture or couches, so we used lawn chairs for a while, we used mattresses for couches, all that same kind of stuff. Then we moved to a nicer apartment, and we got a dog, which was really exciting because that definitely meant that we were settling down. This is the dog. It was super cute. And just as we got the dog and we settled in, the apartment upstairs flooded on burnt down on Christmas Eve. And so our apartment flooded, and so we had to move again. And so, of course, we didn't have insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So then we stayed in another sort of temporary apartment. And then finally, my parents bought what is called a townhouse in Canada, which is basically a terrace house here. With a lot of help from my grandfather, they finally bought their own place. And so finally, my parents had their own bedroom, which was the first time, but they kept the mattresses because they thought it was really unnecessary to buy an actual bed. This is still the other apartment with the dog. And this is the house we bought. So this was the first house that we actually owned. This is my mom and my brother. And we were all very excited because we've never owned a house, before, except that one time in Poland for 3 months. So it was all very exciting. Then we moved to yet another house because my parents decided that the school district was not the best school district that we could be in, particularly for my brother, because my brother went to a gifted school. I didn't, unfortunately. I wasn't deemed to be gifted, but because my brother was quite clever, he went to what was called in Canada gifted school, or a school for gifted kids. And so my parents wanted to move to the area that was the closest to the best of those schools. So we moved here. I was really unhappy about it because I didn't like the area, and I had to move high schools. I hated it. And so my parents promised that when we moved here, they would actually let me go to the same high school that I went to before. And so my mom actually drove me to the bus stop for 5 years. Or 4 years for half an hour so that I could stay in the same high school. And that basically was the longest place that I have ever stayed in, which was 5 years in that high school. And that high school kind of became my home because I've never really, stayed anywhere for that long and had friends for that long. So it was kind of exciting for me. And then I kind of started accumulating a lot of stuff around that time because this was the first time that we actually had stayed in one place for a significant period of time. And so I think there's a picture of me and my stuff. Oh no, that's a picture of my grandparents and us at Christmas. This is a picture of me and my stuff. So I started accumulating a lot of stuff. And then, of course, we moved again. But at that point, it didn't really matter because I was at university. This is my parents' current house. They moved out of the city. They got a house in the country. But I never actually knew this as my home because I would only come for the summers. And so my parents made a room for me in this house, which was quite bizarre because they basically took all the stuff that I had accumulated over the years and they put it into a room and they arranged it in a way that they thought would be nice. And then I kind of walked in and it was like my whole bizarre life in one room. And it was a very strange experience because I never actually lived in the house. I lived there maximum maybe a month at a time or something like that. But anyway, through all this journeying, I always thought that I really never wanted to move. That I was always really envious of kids who went to the same elementary school, who went to the same high school, who had kids, friends who were back from kindergarten and they never moved. Then I always thought, when I grow up, I'm never going to move. I'm just going to stay in the same place. And then I went to university and then I moved to like 6 different places since, and I don't know why, but it seems like it's kind of in my DNA now to move. And so when I went to university, I lived in one city, then I moved to another, then I moved to another. Then my first job was in Turkey, and I just kind of randomly applied, and I thought, why not? I'll move to Turkey. And then I applied for my next job in Cairo, and I thought, why not Cairo? I'm sure it's a nice place, and I just kind of moved without even thinking about it. And actually, I had no concept of what Cairo looked like. I stayed there for 3 years. I had no concept of what it looked like. All I had was my job contract. And the day before I left my parents' house, I checked the weather. Because I thought, maybe I should know what the weather is like when I'm landing there. And that's all I knew about Cairo. And I just kind of kept moving. And then I moved to Ireland, which didn't feel like home at all. But I blame the weather for that. It's awful. I was in Cork. I don't know if you know Cork, but not good. And then I finally moved here. And I guess what kind of struck me is that in some ways I felt at home in all of these places, but in a very different kind of way that maybe is experienced by people who haven't moved. And so in some ways I felt more at home in the places to which I had no connection. And I only kind of started to think about that now when I was asked to do this presentation. And so I always felt like I was coming back home when I was coming back to Cairo, even though I didn't speak the language, even though I lived a very isolated sort of expat life. But when I would land in Cairo, I would say, okay, I would feel like I've come home. And I spent a lot of summers in Turkey. And when I would land in Turkey, I would get the same feeling that I've kind of come home, even though I only lived there for 3 months at a time in the summer and so on. When I would go back to Canada, I never felt like I was going back home. Even though my family was there, even though I spent maybe 15 years of my life there. When I go back to Poland, I never feel like I'm going back home. I always feel like a bit of a tourist. And so I don't know, it's an interesting feeling, and I guess it's quite, I'm not sure how to explain it, but it's almost the more foreign a place is, the more at home I feel in it, and I wonder if it's because of all these different homes that I've had in the past. So I think I'll end there because I feel like maybe I've gone over time, even though I thought I wouldn't. And so I will hand over to Richard. And of course, if, when we move back to the tent, I'm happy to, yeah. It kind of did, yeah. When I first moved here, it felt quite foreign. And I've been here now for 5 years. First 2 years in Stony Stratford, second 3 years in Wolverton, which is where I live now. And it did, and it felt kind of foreign, but now it feels kind of nice. But somehow I still don't feel like when I land at the airport in the UK, I don't feel yet like I've come home. I don't get the same feeling I got in Cairo or in Turkey. But when I arrive at my house, I feel like I'm home, Because that was my other obsession growing up, is not growing up, but when I got older. And when I moved here, was I wanted to own my own place. And again, I know sort of rationally it sounds really silly, but I became kind of obsessed with owning a place because I felt, I guess, like I needed it to be mine for me to feel like I'm home. And it kind of was, it kind of works and kind of doesn't, but I think it'll still take some time.
Thank you.
Over to Richard.
Thank you, Agnes. That was beautiful. Round of applause for Agnes. Thank you for telling us about your life. Agnes, do we have a hashtag for this event, just in case anyone is on social media and wants to tweet about what we're talking about? It's called Open Forum Home, so maybe that's the hashtag, Open Forum Home. If anyone feels the need, do feel free to make use of your social media telephones. So we've got to be out of this space at 4:30, so I'm going to do a quick 20 minutes, and then we're going to introduce Back to Back up on stage. They're going to show a very small exclusive clip of the democratic set. So I've got a bunch of stuff, mostly pertaining towards the notion of home, which I'm going to show you. It's great to be back in Milton Keynes. Meltdown Keynes. Which one do you prefer, Molten or Meltdown? They're both at Meltdown. Meltdown Keynes it is. This is a talk about home. It's not about Home Live Art, the organisation. It's not about Home, the venue in Manchester. It's about home. Hello, I'm the award-losing Richard DeDomenici. Quite a lot of this is screen-dependent, so I'm not sure. I hope you can see it okay. It's a beautiful, bright day in the inflatable cinema. Here are some of the things I've lost. I was born according to the Royal College of Art in 1798. I didn't actually study there. I'm from Watford, which is just up there. Thank you to the Watford Massive. Thanks for coming all the way from Watford today. I almost grew up in Milton Keynes because my mum was going to move here, my mum and dad. I was born in Newcastle. My parents were both from London. For various reasons, we got migrated out of London. We couldn't afford to live there anymore. My grandma's still there, just near the Grenfell Tower, actually. My mum was going to move to Milton Keynes, but then she had a dream that she was shot by a policeman in Milton Keynes, the chances of which are very low compared to Watford. And she could see out of the side of her face, so for that reason she decided not to move to Milton Keynes, even though it does have a lower crime rate than Watford, I think. I think that's true, last time I checked. Anyway, as you know, London has the most overpriced homes in the world. It is still possible to live there as an artist if you know what time to buy things from the supermarket. Here's my weekly shop. Since the bag tax, I've started a new sport. It's called food balancing. It's an exciting new sport that I hope to get into the 2024 Olympics. I'm only here today because of the cake. Where's the cake? There's supposed to be cake. I think that's in the Arabian tent afterwards, so do look out for that. A lot of talented people can no longer afford to live in London, which poses the important question, will these anti-homeless spikes really be sufficient to deter a rough sleeping magician? Yeah, think about it. I haven't. So to stem the flow of artists moving to other cheaper foreign cities, I've had some ideas about how to stabilise house prices in London, one of which is to relocate the UK's government to Cumbernauld in Scotland, a rival new town. I don't know if you know about Cumbernauld. It's got some beautiful brutalist architecture. By moving the government to Cumbernauld, it would free up huge swathes of central London for conversion into affordable housing for key workers, nurses, teachers and performance artists. I consider myself a key worker. Locksmiths, they should get key worker status, shouldn't they? That's my best joke. moving Westminster, Scotland would also help redistribute growth, balance the north-south divide, and deliver many of the benefits of Scottish independence. Italy, where I'm half from, also has a north-south divide. The north is kind of rich and boring, and the south is poor and crazy. That's I'm not Scottish. I was born in Newcastle, near the border, Hexham, just near Hadrian's Wall. So, hence that's why you sense Scottishness in me, I'm sure. I don't speak any Italian. I'm not a good Italian. I'm going there to try and get in touch with my roots, but I'll tell you about that later. So the south is poor and crazy. The rich is poor. The north is poor and boring. To reconcile this, I'm hoping to open a boutique in Milan in the north that sells clothing for Italian businesswomen woven from the excess body hair of hairy Neapolitan men from the south, to help redistribute the wealth. This boutique will be called Hirsute, and the sign will do this. Look, it's a high concept shop. Hopefully it'll be the kind of stimulus that will re-establish growth. Good. Now, London is increasingly resembling a phallocentric game of architectural Tetris. This is out of date, this picture. I need to update that. There's some new skyscrapers in London now. The Gherkin, the Shard, the Cheese Grater, the Walkie-Talkie, and soon the Undershaft. That's really what it's called. Clearly, architects have small penises, which is why I'm currently working with University College London to prototype a satirical range of 3D printed London skyscraper adult toys in a project I'm calling Genitaldrification. So do look out for that. I'm going to skip that and come back to that later. This is a project where I invited the young people of Croydon to build a replica of their home, Croydon Town Centre, which I then destroyed dressed as Godzilla. Destroyed. It was all fun and games, I thought, until about 2 years later, when rioting in Croydon led to many of those actual buildings being destroyed in real life by many of those same children you see in this video. So, you know, you've got to watch out as a performance artist, cause and effect. In 2011, I went to Tokyo and installed London Underground bobbly strap hangers in apartment blocks, skyscrapers, and underground trains to reduce injury during seismic activity. Removed from the tube for health and safety reasons. 10 days later, Japan suffers its most powerful quake, and again I realise how difficult it can be to be an artist consistently seconds ahead of their time. In a similar vein, a few years ago now, 2015, I did a project called The Death of Social Housing. This is pre-Grenfell. What? Agnes? You might be right. This is a horse-drawn carriage pulling a coffin designed to resemble a block of London council flats. This is pre-Grenfell. We carried it into the Barbican Centre. We held eulogies for the gentrification that's happening, for the people that are being decanted out of their social housing. That's an official term used by the government to move people out of their homes. Decanted, which is a very middle-class word for what's happening. Anyway, I can't do this performance anymore because of Grenfell. It's too on the nose. This is in Belgrade, where a similar gentrification process is happening to the Belgrade waterfront. We set little boats on fire. This is at the Latitude Festival. I've changed the ending basically. Now we have these more optimistic air burials, because the burning just brings back too many memories of sadness and loss in London at the minute. So it's great that art can change the world. I bet you're all thinking, I just wish that sometimes it would do so for the better. I found an example of that. This is in Chicago, actually, where Agnes used to live. In this project, I wandered around Chicago with a plastic bag on my head and my hands tethered behind my back with a nylon cable tie, the US's then method of choice for containing enemy combatants. There's a little bit of swearing in this video. 48 hours later, the Abu Ghraib prisoner abuse scandal broke internationally, and within a fortnight, US forces had outlawed the use of hooding in Iraq. And I cite this as evidence of the shamanistic properties of performance art. To expand on this premise, I theorise that artists possess an instinctive foresight that can manifest itself through performance before it can be expressed in words.
Why are you doing that?
Been invited from the UK to come and make a performance.
And this is what you do?
This is one of the things I do. How did it look?
Well, you got people calling all over the world about you.
Thus, they are able to predict the future, but only in ways that are quite difficult to interpret until after the case. I almost got arrested in that performance, but because I was white and English, I managed to get away with it. I'm aware of my own cultural privilege. So, I've been, a couple of years ago, I remade some scenes from Superman in Milton Keynes. Some of the people that are in it are here this evening. Carly and Sam and Eric. Eric is here. So I'm going to show you a clip of that in a moment. But I wanted to do this project in Milton Keynes for many years, to the extent that I applied to lots of different people. They all said no at first, because the idea was ahead of its time. And I even once applied to the Open University, very tenuously, to remake Superman for the Quest for Peace in Milton Keynes, because there was, to celebrate 50 years of Harold Wilson's speech announcing a University of the Air. Do you know about this speech?
I've not been there, though.
There was some, I don't think, yeah, no, I'm not blaming you for this. They commissioned some art, and I thought the University of the Air, Superman. Let me explain. 7 years after the first students enrolled at the OU, Superman, the movie, was released. The film begins with a scientist sending his baby son to Earth for the benefit of all humanity. And he says in this film, "All I have learned I bequeath. Learn and live." Inside the module that Superman is put into, the child is taught about the planet he will soon inhabit and protect. We hear the onboard computer teaching him about Einstein's theory of relativity, early Chinese writings. His journey takes 3 years, the length of a university degree, before the module crash lands in a rural Midwest wheat field. Baby Superman literally had his own University of the Air. Yeah. When he grows up, Superman returns to the Fortress of Solitude for several more years of training and education. Superman, then, is an excellent example of the power of modular teaching, distance learning, and adult education as a means of discovering one's own strengths. The Open University didn't go for that proposal, and because it was a little bit tenuous. But I didn't give up. It's a great exercise in not giving up. And after applying to 3 or 4 different places, I was very pleased when the Milton Keynes International Festival let me do it 2 years ago. I'll show you a clip in a minute. I was even going to say we could replace Superman's logo with the Open University logo on his chest. I think it would have been very good. Never mind. I do have a new idea for Milton Keynes, by the way, to do with these. They're called porte cochères. Is that true? Yeah, porte cochères, 280 of these in Milton Keynes. To me, they do look a little bit similar. They're kind of prototype, probably, for the IKEA lac table, which came out after these. And to celebrate this design similarity, I'd like to place a IKEA lac table on the top of each of the 280 porte cochères. There's 2 on there, but we would only do 1 for budgetary reasons. It would cost £1,400. So that's all the money I'm looking for the porte cochere lac project, which I hope to bring to Milton Keynes in what is it now? Let's say 2020. Okay, good. So, yeah, is that the next festival? Yeah. Oh, great, perfect. So, there's a little bit of Superman. This is all online. You can go and have a look at it because it's very long. It lasts for 10 minutes.
Tedious.
And we recreated it in the original location where Superman 4 was filmed in Milton Keynes.
The Daily Planet hasn't made any money in 3 years.
There's Eric.
And the name of the game is making.
There's Carly House.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And there's Sam in the background.
My daughter, Lacey Warfield.
Thanks.
So this is in the Argos headquarters, which is now the Sainsbury's headquarters, I guess. They were very worried about us filming in there because they were being taken over by Sainsbury's at the time. They didn't want us to see all their secrets.
Subject of our newest exhibit has graciously donated a strand of his hair to the museum. The museum will be closing soon, so we should hurry a little.
And we'll skip right to the end. But we had, oh look, here's a scene that no one has ever seen, which we cut out of Superman 4 Redux because there was no time to put it in, basically. And this was a great scene where some participants pulled some fake pigeons out of the way to replicate them being scared of Superman's power. Here we go.
And we're rolling.
And 3, 2, 1, action! Pigeons! Oh, beautiful! It's a shame there was no time to put that in. Anyway, do feel free to watch that on the reduxproject.com/Superman 4. I still haven't I wasn't going to do this for the whole okay, Mr. Redux, ride for sound. Who has the big okay, good, sound 2, yes, we need stereo. Look, there we are. Now, noisier mixing leads have got much bigger. Oh God, look it up on the internet. It's all through the shopping centre, it's beautiful. This is my fake Olympic torch performance from 2012, in which I ran slightly ahead of the actual Olympic torch with a fake Olympic torch. And this is at the end when the police got quite annoyed by me and were just chasing me down Regent Street in a van. They pursued me on foot. They were very upset with me, but they couldn't really arrest me because A, I wasn't breaking the law, and B, the actual torch was a couple of minutes behind. They had to secure that instead. Look at the expression on that woman's face. Her mind has been changed. That is the power of art, ladies and gentlemen. If you're interested, the torch that I used is currently on display at the Museum of Science and Industry in Bradford in an exhibition about sport and technology. So that's how quickly the avant-garde can be absorbed into the system by which it attempts to critique. So 6 years, yeah. I have a long history of impersonation. Here's my radical feminist tribute to Eurovision winners Fuck Spiz. They're called Fuck Spiz. It's not rude. There's quite a lot of homelessness in Milton Keynes, as in other cities around the country. This is a project in which I impersonated a homeless person. This is called reverse begging, and I sit in the street with a coin in my hand and I ask passers-by, would you like some spare change, instead of, do you have any spare change? And it's quite good. When it works at its best, people get trapped in a kind of logic loop because they don't want to acknowledge you, but at the same time there's the prospect of some free money, and it's great. They can be stuck there deciding for hours when it works best. It kind of challenges people's assumptions about what reality is. Here's a little clip. This is in Reykjavik. And, you know, you can all try this. You don't have to do it for long. It doesn't have to be an expensive performance for you. It's quite hard. People often won't take it. Normally it's children with jaundice. Look at her, yellow. That's because it's Reykjavik. They don't get enough sunlight. So yeah, feel free to try out reverse begging on the streets of Milton Keynes this afternoon. As I mentioned earlier, I'm half Italian. I'm doing a project soon with a performer from Italy. I'm going to skip right through that. A performer from Italy called Monica Napo. She's recently, on the day that Brexit was announced, she decided to divorce her English husband. She's an actor. That's her with Roberto Benigni and Woody Allen. She's famous in Italy. I, on the other hand, have decided that post-Brexit I want to get more in touch with my European side, so that's why I'm going to be visiting the DeDomenici salami factory in northern Italy to get some of my own sausage. I'm going to skip past this. This is all irrelevant. That's me testing the cladding on a high-rise building in Sheffield. Let's talk about this. In 2005, I built a domestic nuclear bomb shelter in room 163 of London's Great Eastern Hotel, using fixtures and fittings found within the room, following the detailed instructions given in the 1980 government public information film Protect and Survive. My attempt to live in the bunker for a fortnight was interrupted. I'll show you the video first. You can't really see it. Anyway, my attempt to live in the bunker for a fortnight was interrupted on the morning of July the 7th when a bomb went off in the tube tunnels beneath the hotel, and I was evacuated by the Metropolitan Police from my bomb shelter. Yeah, what does that mean? Probably nothing. This is my boy band that I started in 2006, an asylum seeker boy band. It was televised on Channel 4. I'll just show a very quick clip of it.
This is Richard DeDomenici. His aim is to use art to make
The project was
people
designed to
look at the
alter
world
attitudes
differently.
towards immigration amongst
This time
that
he's taking
difficult
on
to reach
immigration,
opinion
his most
influencing
ambitious
female
project
adolescent
yet,
demographic.
to form his very own
The opinion
boy
formers
band,
of tomorrow.
made up entirely of asylum
And it
seekers.
worked,
He
but
wants
it
to
was
change the way people think
criticised
about
quite heavily
refugees,
by the press.
poke fun at the talent show
The Guardian
genre,
said it
and
was
at
the
the same
worst
time
idea for a
satisfy
television
his secret
programme in the
yearning
world ever.
to be a pop Sven-Guy.
Later it would be nominated for a Royal
He
Television
has only
Society
2
Award,
weeks
so
to
it kind of
teach his band to sing in
polarised
English.
the media.
Show them his funky moves,
Put me off making television programmes for 10 years.
perform live on
But
London
at
South
least it
Bank.
was 2006 and Twitter wasn't a thing, otherwise it would have been...
Today I have a boy
Would have been
band.
crazy. I'm quickly going to talk about Shed Your Fears, which is the reason I was asked here, really, which was a project organised by Counterpoints Arts. Came out of a conversation about post-Brexit, about how you can't trust the polls, by which I mean voting polls, not Polish people. People weren't talking to each other, basically. There's a climate of fear. People weren't honest about their intentions, and so we're trying to think of ways to facilitate this. And this is the prototype. It's like a small confession booth, basically, and it ended up being built. I made it look a bit more like a shed, and we called it Shed Your Fears. And it was a non-denominational, non-hierarchical booth into which 2 people from different backgrounds get to confess their fears to each other. And it was private and safe and secure. And we took it to the Tate Modern. That's where it launched, and that's me invigilating it. And I'll skip past this. This is all on DeDomenici.com/Shed Your Fears if you want to look at any of this information. And complete strangers became friends afterwards. Some people didn't become friends. Some people ran off, so they didn't have to meet the other person. And we recorded the conversations as well. We told people beforehand. So we've got an amazing archive, which I'm still translating and transcribing in association with the University of Loughborough. And we're going to do a little bit of research into, because we took a little bit of information about where people were from, how old they were, and we're going to see if there's any correlation between what people are scared of and where they're from and stuff like that. So that's a young participant there. People came out in tears. One family went in. I said, it won't work with a family because you already know each other too well, but a mother went in, her 2 sons went in the other side, and she came out and said, my sons talked to me about things that we've never discussed before as a family. So just the context of the shed and the kind of confession booth style privacy really helps people to open up. So it started at the Tate, it's been to, that's at the, we got some, oh that's me over, that's at the British Library, we've got some vinyl text on it now that explains the thing to people. It's been to Bournemouth, and we hope to tour it around. That's Eleanor Belfiore from the University of Loughborough. There's some of the tweets of some of the things that people have said inside. And again, you can have a look at more of that at DeDomenici.com, Shed Your Fears. I'll just quickly show you this project. It's my attempt to solve the housing crisis. Street utility cabinets are ubiquitous in towns and cities, but go unnoticed by most. In this project, I attempt to add discrete prefabricated parasitic structures to the streets of London as a potential solution of overcrowded cities. It's a bit small, but the next version will be the size of a small house and has the potential to destabilise the property market. A project which I'm calling Anarchitecture. Look out for it. Hopefully you won't spot it. It's inspired by Japanese pet architecture. And there's a Venn diagram for you to memorise. I'm not going to show you that. We're not quite sure what it's going to look like yet, but it will be some kind of prefabricated structure that will plonk on the streets in the middle of the night. Because there's kind of shanty structures showing up in London these days with furniture and everything, but obviously they get moved on very quickly. So we're going to design something that looks a bit more permanent, that looks like it's supposed to be there, and I'm going to live in it and see how long it's possible to live in such a structure before somebody realises that it's not supposed to be there. I'm working with a young architect. He's done all my measurements, so it'll be very small. Depends on my hair, how tall, maximum hair. That's where the ceiling's going to be, just there. And it'll be delivered in the night on the back of a lorry, and will have a kind of facade that will look like stone or something. So hopefully it won't get noticed by anybody. That's my architect, Zine. Don't really have time to show this footage. He's a young architect who's doing some amazing work. And Anarchitecture, look out for it. Hopefully you won't spot it. That's the Free Balloons project, which I'm not going to mention. We talked about that. If anyone wants to be in a Redux, I'm remaking Get Carter in Newcastle in September, and also Atonement in Redcar, the Dunkirk scenes, which were actually shot in Yorkshire in September. And finally, the Swivel Olympics is going to Finland. If anyone's in Finland in September, do look out for the Swivel Olympics. That's been me, Rich DeDomenici, Backward Solutions for a Progressive Future. Be a cog in the system and a spanner in the works, ladies and gentlemen. That's my message. And also, we live in unprecedented times. Let's make some unprecedented art. I'm going to hand you over now to Back Theatre, who are going to show some clips of their democratic set. I've been Rich DeDomenici. Thank you very much.
I would. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, Agnes. My name is Tamara, and I'm Artistic Associate at Back Theatre. And with me today I have Simon Laity and Ali Harvey. Simon's an ensemble member with our company, and Ali Harvey is our senior producer. Back Theatre is a company founded 30 years ago in Geelong, Australia. And we feel very fortunate to be here in Milton Keynes. Thank you, Open University, Bill, and the Milton Keynes International Festival, and Ursula for having us. The project that we're here with today and this week is the Democratic Set. And the Democratic Set is a collaborative filmmaking residency which has been running for, 10 years, maybe not quite 10 years, and we've done it in 33 different places around the world. And it is an opportunity for anyone to be a part of a film and have 15 minutes of a 20-minute slot to try out an idea with a director and a videographer, and the resulting film that's made from the community members is edited together, and it becomes a portrait of a community at a particular point in time. So we've had an amazing experience with the people of Milton Keynes over the last 3 days shooting this film, and we had incredible participation from a really wide range of social and cultural demographics from this area. And I think that it speaks, we feel very fortunate to do these projects in these different places because we become embedded in the local culture and language and humour and feeling of a community, and we get a sense of what home is to you and what your culture is, and then hopefully we get to show that back to you as well, so that you get to see it and go, yeah, that's what I'm like, that's what we're like. So I think that we're going to show you a couple of little tiny little clips which have not been edited or treated at all, and tomorrow night is the big launch of this beautiful film. So come along to that. I think it's at 7 o'clock, and in the meantime you can get a sneak preview.
Where a lot of homeless people sleep is the underpasses, where or out of the city centre, or in places, in houses or.
Just because I wear this hijab doesn't make me a terrorist.
Thanks very much. So we really encourage you to come along tomorrow night and see the whole film.